I don't see how you're going to be able to separate morality from our material universe and
Well, I think it's the
outcomes within
same
our
way
material
that, I
universe.
mean, you're kind of referencing like trolley problems and all these different hypotheticals that kind of make morality seem a lot more biological than mathematical.
Well, I could pose this kind of question to you. Um, Give me a single example of something with a non-neutral moral effect, which has no material impact. You know,
Translate again. Say it again.
some kind of moral decision or moral outcome or whatever. Something that is moral that is immaterial, you know?
Yeah.
Like you can't, for example, you couldn't give like killing, for example, because killing is destroying a material object
Right.
of
Right.
the person.
Yeah.
So you have to. I'm putting the onus on you if you want to claim that morality is immaterial,
Mm-hmm.
and is an immaterial, like logical system, the way that math is. You have to come up with. I'll accept even a single one, an instance of a moral event that exists independently from the material universe or a hypothetical material universe.
I will give you an example of that once you give me an example of math with under the same conditions that's not fixed in the material universe.
So, like, all I need to do is come up with a system of a mathematical equation, event, whatever, that couldn't possibly correspond to something in the material universe, or a hypothetical material universe with different properties.
Let's stick with geometry.
Well, there's a whole wide wide. What about imaginary numbers? They don't exist. They can't exist. The square root of -1. They don't exist.
Right.
Bam. Your turn.
Shit.
It took me less than a minute.
Well, the point that I was trying to make there was, so I think I'm just going to explain my idea just because I can't think of an unincarnated moral situation. I'm kind of stumped right now, but I don't think that's important because in the same way that like in geometry we have these principles and rules that we kind of intuit. We understand the definition of a triangle, and so we know that, or like we know the definition of a circle, so that we can intuit from that like a formula to formulate its area, without ever having seen that circle before, without ever having seen a perfect circle, without ever even having like measured it. We don't even have to have measured anything. All like it's completely unincarnated.
It's an optimal use of a perimeter. It's maximum area per perimeter. That's what a circle is.
Right. And yet we can apply it to material phenomena in a way that's very productive. But any material phenomenon that you give me is going to be, because it's material, it's not going to match that principle of like the area of a circle perfectly. It's going to always be a little bit of smudging. In the same way, I think in the moral sphere we have principles that are self-evident, as it were. Some are a little more complicated, but every time you incarnate it in an example, the edges kind of fudge. It becomes a little more difficult to navigate, like the trolley problem or whatever. Like things become less clear.
I don't really know if that's like so. If I make a circle and it's not a perfect circle,
Yeah.
that doesn't change what pi is. Obviously, it just means that my incarnation of this mathematical construct isn't perfect. Like the Earth is a sphere, right? But it doesn't perfectly conform to the volume of a sphere equation.
Correct.
Because it resembles a sphere. It has forces that are constantly pushing for it to be a sphere, but in aggregate, but it doesn't there hasn't been enough time for those forces to really wear down all those edges. But what does that have to do with anything?
I'm saying in the same way
what's
that
your point?
I'm saying in the same way that you can't find a material instance of a perfect circle, and yet we know perfectly in our minds what a perfect circle is.
Well, yeah, because it depends on an irrational number that, as far as I understand, can't even be represented in.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
our universe.
Exactly.
I don't actually know that though. I don't know enough math to actually.
Well, I mean, it's kind of represented in a perfect circle, but only in a perfect circle. That's the only time you're going to get a representation.
We can't find a perfect circle.
Exactly.
None exist.
Yeah, and yet no one disputes that this principle of pi exists somewhere.
It's an asymptote. It's an asymptote. It's something that's constantly being approached, but it doesn't have to be.
Well, in the material
reached.
universe, but in the immaterial world of mathematics, we know that pi is a fixed thing. It's not an asymptote. It's an actual number that somehow achieves itself. Because we know that the perfect circle.
But you could still treat it as an asymptote. You would still say like circles that are optimizing area for perimeter. What is the what is this?
But what do you mean by optimize? You're still thinking it in terms of in terms of this perfect circle that I have in my head, optimize according to that. You're still presupposing.
I'm not comparing to a perfect thing. I'm saying you get a certain amount of area for a certain perimeter. If I gave you a length of string, and I said, capture as much. This is a fence. Capture as much area with this fence as you can. Then you would approach a perfect circle. You're not referring to the circle. You're just getting more and more. You're perfecting your ability to capture area more and more and more and more and more. And as you did, the geometry of what you were doing would be described closer with pi. It would be or pi would show up in the calculation of what you were doing. So in that sense, it's an asymptote. It's something that's constantly being approached in all of its physical manifestations as they get closer, and it could never be surpassed. That's what an asymptote is. But this I kind of see where you're going, where you say material manifestations of these immaterial, mathematical abstractions are always
fudged.
They're always approaching them, but they never actually reach. But again, it's just because, we say that the Earth is one thing, or we it's really just a matter of perspective.
But anyway, you'll find that
it's only close enough. We're only ever operating in the realm of close enough, and I guess that you're trying to make some relation of this back to morality. But the question still stands: what is an example? What is the imaginary numbers thing of morality? What's an example of something in what you're describing as this immaterial morality system that would be moral, and we can see has this moral structuring that isn't referring to things in the material universe?
The principle of non-contradiction. Maybe that can be stretched to make it be made moral.
I don't think so.
Not
I can tell that mathematics supersedes the material universe. A, because it drives things in the material universe, obviously, but B, because it's bigger. There's elements of that abstract morality, a mathematical system, that lack manifestation in the real universe. If you want to say that morality supersets the material universe rather than being a subset within it, you have to come up with something where it's something clearly exists but doesn't apply to just our limited perspective.
Right.
Principle of non-contradiction. I don't know how you could stretch that to be moral.
I'm just spitballing. But I think it's legitimate evidence that every people can all agree on principles, even if they disagree on how they're applied. I think that's a strange coincidence.
People don't always agree on principles. What principles? Liberty and happiness? The value of liberty and happiness? You've yet to agree with me on those.
We disagree on definitions, not the things in themselves.
If we're not referring to the same thing, then we're not referring to the same thing. If we're agreeing to the same statement, but the words don't mean the same things, then we're not agreeing with each other. You know, we sound like we are, but unless one of us makes definitions that the other finds acceptable, and we say based on those definitions, yeah, I think that too. Until that point, we're not agreeing with each other.
Okay.
Not that it matters.
Right.
I mean, in a way, it does matter because I think it matters a lot. But
yeah, I can't think of anything right now. A moral instance, a pure moral instance that is unincarnated.
I'm so happy I came up with imaginary numbers.
I think I'm a materialist now. You convinced me.
Are you lying? Yeah, you're lying.